Welcome to Great Game Design, the series where we look at moments or sequences from games that are just great for one reason or another, look at how and why they work and what other games can learn from them. Nearly 2 decades after its release, Half-Life 2 remains a masterclass in how to handle tutorials and convey information to the player. This is because it combines a few different methods of tutorialization that don't break the immersion of the experience for the player and never feel too handholdy. How does it do this? Let's take a look. What is probably the most well-known example of Half-Life 2's brilliant tutorials is how it teaches the player to interact with a Barnacle enemy. Just take a look at how this enemy is introduced.
Pacify. Pressure. Sword. Sterilize. Attention protection team. Status.
No pop-up, no voiceover, just a scripted event that lasts a few seconds, and now you know what happens to you if you walk into the path of the Barnacle's tongue. What follows shortly after are sections where you're given the chance to experience this firsthand, or avoid it. The floors here are slippery and slimy, so there's a good chance you're going to end up on the tongue of one of these things, and you're going to need to learn how to deal with that situation quickly. Again, no pop-up or voiceover, the game trusts you to figure out what to do here. The last part of this subtle but brilliant tutorial comes just a little later. Watch what happens. Immediately the player sees for themselves that the barnacles aren't smart enough to differentiate food from non-food. As far as the barnacle is concerned, if it touches its tongue, it's getting eaten, which in the case of a normal barrel doesn't mean too much. But just a few seconds later, the player spots some explosive red boughs that will only take a little nudging to be placed in the path of a bunch of barnacle tongues, and without the game ever explicitly telling them anything, they'll know exactly what to do. The game doesn't even force you to watch its teaching moments, never taking control of the camera. The onus to watch and learn from the environment is put entirely on the player. Half-Life 2 puts you in the shoes of Gordon Freeman, a theoretical physicist turned saviour of mankind. As Gordon is a silent protagonist without much of a personality, he basically acts as an avatar for the player to act within the world.
Man, a few words, aren't you?
But given Half-Life's identity at the time being the FPS that pushed physics engines and physics-based puzzles, I think that background was chosen for him for a reason. The developers wanted the players to feel smart for solving all the challenges that lie ahead of them. That's why it's important for players to feel like they figured this out themselves. This wouldn't feel the same if every stage of this had a pop-up explaining what to do, or an NPC radioing in to tell you to stay clear of the barnacle tongues. Now this is all well and good, but it doesn't paint the full picture. For this to work, Half-Life 2 does have to teach you how its physics work with some slightly more traditional tutorials first, but it still does so in a manner that doesn't feel patronising and fits entirely in universe. You're taught how to pick up and interact with objects by this civilian protection officer abusing his power and authority over what he thinks is a random civilian. Later, Dr. Kleiner has you help out with the first use of his teleportation machine, teaching you how these plug and socket puzzles work for the rest of the game, with some light lampshading of the situation from Barney.
Good job, Gordon. Throwing that switch and all. I can see your MIT education really pays for itself.
Even later in the game, there's a lengthy tutorial on how to use a gravity gun presented by Alex and Dog, in which you play fetch. Characters telling you to do something, with a control prompt popping up on screen, is a little more blatantly teaching you the game than the barnacle situation, but this is laying the groundwork for those future teaching moments and exists as an in-story event, not pulling you into some alternate dimension reserved for learning game mechanics. Of course, not everything can be presented strictly in universe. That moment with the trash can is accompanied by a prompt, as are some later sections, but this is completely unobtrusive, much less than having to dig through the menus to look or remember what a control would be. The lesson we can learn from Half-Life 2 is, wherever possible, simply show the player how the mechanics of the game work rather than sitting them down to explain it to them. and when something has to be told to them, do it in an unobstructive manner that doesn't pause the flow of the game or take control away from them. So why is it that many games still haven't learnt this lesson? Well, simply put, it doesn't work for every game. There are many games that could use this approach but have simply failed to do so and are worse for it. But with more complex and systems-driven games, sometimes sitting the player down and explaining the mechanics is the best solution. Games like Civilization, or Armored Core, or Stellaris are so chock full of mechanics and presented in such a way they don't really work without explicit tutorialization and information being given to the player. Also, it has to be said that Valve was in a very unique position at the time of Half-Life 2's development, and still is to an extent. Valve is known for testing their games over and over, putting them through more revision cycles and testing than any other developer, with perhaps only Blizzard being their equals at the time. Valve is owned by Gabe Newell, a former Microsoft executive. Several members of the team say that they were effectively given unlimited development time and budget by Gabe to make the game, ensuring they could playtest the game over and over and make sure their subtle tutorials weren't going over people's heads. Other developers don't have the time or money to repeat this process until they get it perfect, and tutorials tend to be done in the later stages of development once the game's mechanics are actively locked down, meaning they're usually produced when the dev team is under heavy crunch and are scrambling to get things done. So unfortunately, just slapping a text box on the screen and ticking tutorials done off their checklist is often seen as good enough. But the beauty of this method is that you tend to notice when it's not being used more than when it is. You and I have both probably played a bunch of games that subtly teach us how to play like this without us noticing. If you know of any other examples of tutorials that were so sneaky you didn't notice them at first, let us know down in the comments below. Where in this video we learnt a trick that Valve could pull off due to its vast resources, in the next one we'll be returning to the Half-Life series to see that even with virtually unlimited time and money, Valve also manages to do more with less. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like and or subscribed, as this would really help me make more videos like this.